Okay, so let's get into Pep Guardiola a little bit more. Where I'd like to start this conversation is, are we enjoying this? And by that I mean, is it an interesting, sort of fascinating challenge to see one of the greatest managers of all time going through something he's never experienced before? Or is this actually quite sad that we're seeing one of the best Premier League teams in history almost fall apart in front of our eyes?
There's definitely a fascination to it, and I would liken it to pro golfers at the Open hacking round in the wind and the rain, and taking 3 shots out of the rough like any normal golfer would. You watch pro golfers to see them hit the big drives and sink the big putts, but there is a fascination about seeing someone at the top of their game struggle to that extent, and I think that's probably what we're seeing a little bit now with City. Obviously, there's not going to be much sympathy with neutral fans for what City are going through because of how City have been built, and City will be well aware of that. But I think generally, unless you're an avid Man City fan, there is a fascination about seeing it, arguably the best manager in the world and one of the best teams in the world struggle to this extent, because it's not just a simple dip of, they've drawn 3 games out of 5. I mean, this is a serious blip, and it does look, sometimes when you look at them, like, you are watching before your eyes one of the best teams in the world fall apart.
I mean, it's true. I mean, Pep has never been through adversity before. I mean, this is the first time he started his managerial career at Barcelona in 2008, won a treble his first season, and since then it has been. He's had a gilded career, hasn't he? Barcelona, Bayern Munich, Man City. He's been at the biggest, most powerful clubs in the country at that time, and he's never had anything like this. So it's funny, after the game at Anfield when they lost to Liverpool, I put that point in the press conference. You've never been in this situation before. What is it like? And he kind of ducked it by saying, well, the wine doesn't taste as good as it normally does. And he hasn't yet acknowledged that he's in a real kind of crisis. He hasn't acknowledged that he's in a situation whereby he might not have the skill set or the tools to get out of it, because he's never been here before. I can't think of his biggest crisis before this crisis, in inverted commas, would have been, is it losing 3 games at Bayern Munich? And it's just
first season at City was tough.
City,
we don't coach tackles after the Leicester game where they were well beat, and he looked a little bit rattled.
The Claudio Bravo,
but obviously that was still very, very early. This is different.
And he knew then as well that he'd been given the license by City's owners to completely rip it up and start again. But you're right. I mean, finishing 4th that first season, if you look at that league table, I think there may be a point or goal difference ahead of Man United. So if he'd missed out of the Champions League, but still, this is something that is just off the scale. And I don't know if he knows how to deal with it, because I was in Turin for the Juventus game when they lost, and he had Gundogan and De Bruyne in midfield. And we've spoken about their age a lot now. And Pep keeps saying they're not an old team, but they are an old team. Gundogan's 34, De Bruyne's 33. They played 90 plus whatever minutes, 95 minutes against Juventus. He waited till the 87th minute to make a change, and it was Mateus Nunes on for Jack Grealish. And then 4 days later, the Manchester derby, he's starting to midfielder De Bruyne and Gundogan. I couldn't believe it that he's not. Now, obviously, he's got injuries. People like John Stones are missing, but where is Pep's kind of innovation here? Where's his genius in the sense that he's seen a problem and made it go away? Forever, his teams has always been about having the best players in the best team, and he's just go out and play. And now he's going to have to think about it as a coach. I haven't seen any.
Well, there is innovation. He won the league without.
No, I mean now in this situation, where is his innovation now? Where is his plan? What is he doing different now that he's never done before? Do you know what I mean? What I'm saying? Yeah. He's not done anything different in this situation. It's almost like he doesn't know what to do. And we can't believe I'm saying that about Pep Guardiola, but perhaps because he's had such a brilliant career at the biggest, richest, most successful clubs, he's in a situation now where he's having to manage like Sam Allardyce, and he don't know how to do it.
One of the biggest surprises, I think, is, I know we've crunched the numbers, but is the mentality issue of conceding leads. You think about the final game, obviously the Manchester derby. Okay, I understand the argument. If we're talking about them being an old side, they're still a very experienced side as a result of that, right? So they go hand in hand. And yet, what we're seeing is a quite shocking game management, repeatedly, time and again, and just the absolute sort of brittle, fragile nature of this side. That the moment they concede, they just seem to collapse. I mean, where has that come from? Because we're not talking about, we've got rid of these players and there's a new group who don't know the league, don't know, City, maybe they're 20, 21, 22. This is an experienced, aging group who you would think when they get themselves into a winning position would know how to hold on to it.
I think that's the biggest indicator that something is seriously wrong. Obviously, you can look at the data columns, and you're conceding too many goals, you're not scoring enough. That's obviously a recipe for disaster. But the biggest indicator for me, you mentioned the Manchester derby there, but also that Feyenoord game when they were winning 3-0. Pep Guardiola City do not surrender 3-0 leads ever. They've gone 3 and 4-0 up and then conceded 1 goal, and they've just you can see Pep Guardiola on the touchline, and he just goes, right, shut this down.
Well, they keep the ball for an hour.
I'm sick of this game now. We're finished. We're not playing anymore. We're going to take our ball home. We're going to go away. We're going to win 3-1, and they just couldn't do it against Feyenoord. And I thought it was even more obvious in the Manchester derby, in that they work so hard in a really tough period to get themselves ahead in a really tight game, and you concede a late penalty because of a mistake. It happens. Mistakes happens in all games to all players. But after that, I thought that we'd see Pep Guardiola on the touchline to his players and say, "Look, if we can't win it, fine, but we don't lose. So just keep the ball for 5 minutes, and we'll just go. We'll take what we've got." And they couldn't do it. There was no pressure on the ball when Martinez walks up to the halfway line. He plays that long pass. It travels so long in the air. You've got Amad Diallo, it's a good run, but it's not a particularly clever run. It's just in behind Vardiol, who's completely out of position. And it's a decent finish. But City, for the first time ever, sat in the press box, and we were sat next to each other. For those final sort of 3 or 4 minutes, they looked rattled. And I genuinely don't know why that is, because that's nothing to do with the run that they're on. Because you've just said there, they've got experienced players like Walker, Gundogan, De Bruyne I don't think was on the pitch at the time, but all these serial winners, you would think that the one thing that they've got is the mentality to say, look, and the game management to say, look, let's just put our foot on the ball, and we'll just end this game now. And they couldn't do it.
But they've stopped pressing. They're not pressing up front now. As you mentioned the Martinez situation where he was free to send the ball. So they're not working as hard as it used to be up front. And they are so susceptible to pace on the counter-attack because Kyle Walker's not got any pace anymore. So Diallo, that goal that won the derby was won. The Feyenoord game, I think on each occasion, that the pace of the Feyenoord counter-attack.
Runners in behind.
Absolutely. And they can't handle that. So all of a sudden, I think the players know. I mean, I feel like Nostradamus. I was sat there at half-time in that game thinking what's going to happen here is that United will get into this game in the second half and City will be holding on for the last half an hour because they haven't got the legs. And it sounds like you're just dismissing a group of players, they haven't got the legs, but they really haven't got the legs. And I don't know if it's because, they've had so much intensity over the last 2.5 years. They've been in every competition and international competitions. And whether this season is just one season too far, but if that's the case, this season's got 8 months to go for Man City because they're in the Club World Cup. It could go until the middle of July. And if you're one of the City players, now you're thinking, oh, and even Guardiola, you look at him thinking, how on earth are they going to sustain themselves through a difficult winter to be able to play in July? And we're talking in a minute about potentially bringing players in January, which won't be as easy as people think, but they need to bring somebody in.
Just on that point, I interviewed Bernardo Silva in August a couple of years ago, so he'd just come through what would have been their pre-season training, and it was in a small talk before we actually started the interview, and I said, you've just done another pre-season with Pep, what's that like? And he went, it's hard, I'm exhausted. And he wasn't joking, and that was 2 or 3 years ago. And this is the same group of players are having to deal with the same manager. Now, Pep Guardiola is obviously a genius, but he's incredibly intense in the way that he operates, the way that he speaks to his players. That has got to be really, really tiring, especially for that core of players who've been with him for 5, 6, 7 years. And you talk about a lack of energy and a lack of, they can't press anymore, the lack of legs, but it's also there's got to be some kind of mental fatigue there as well.
Though? That changed this summer because Pep said after the Euros, he basically said, I don't want to see my players again until they want to see a ball. And he made it clear that, I think a lot of his players were in the Euros to the semi-finals to the final. So a lot of them didn't go on the summer tour. And he did make that point. That was a quote. I don't want to see my players until they're ready to see a ball again. And a lot of players didn't come back until late August, early September. So I don't know if they had the same pre-season or the same intensity and they're paying the price. I know it happened at Chelsea under Jose Mourinho. They had a terrible pre-season. It was the season that Jose got sacked. They won the league. And then I think he was sacked after a game at Leicester. They were so far off the pace because they weren't fit enough. Whether that's happened at City, they haven't had the same pre-season because they weren't able to. But if that's the case, they're not going to catch it up.
Do either of you think there are any issues in the camp? And I'm thinking specifically of Kevin De Bruyne here because we know that obviously there's a contract situation in the background, but my mind goes back to Anfield when he doesn't come on, and
he's not getting any contracts.
But he's a big personality in that team. Rightly so. One of the best Premier League, if not the best Premier League midfielder there's ever been. Certainly up there. Is there? Do you think there are issues? Maybe between him and Guardiola, or Guardiola and some of the other players? I don't think that I mean, Pep has been on record as saying that there's no personal issue with I think they've got quite a difficult relationship in the terms of how they are as characters. But I think they've managed to make that relationship work. I think you're right to point out that De Bruyne is obviously
out of contract at the end of the season, and it's a big 6 months for him. I think City maybe will be looking at his injury record and thinking, do we really want to invest that amount of money again in someone who has had 2 really big injury layoffs?
He started talking last summer about leaving, didn't he? So he's already,
There were other sides. The Edison thing in the summer, and towards the end of last season, Stefan Ortega comes in for that game at Spurs. I think you were at, and he makes that huge save. Pep Guardiola, praises him to the ends of the earth and said, "Oh, he's the reason we've won." Essentially, he's the reason why we've won the league because it's such a big game. Edison apparently is not particularly thrilled, and then Guardiola has to come out in the next press conference and he's asked again about Ortega, and he says, "Well, I'm not going to talk about Ortega. I want to talk about what Edison has done over the last sort of 4 or 5 years." Then you've got a situation where Edison is actively trying to leave in the summer. It doesn't happen. These things, these little sort of details haven't really happened to Pep.
But they haven't. The point is, though, they have happened, but they haven't hung around. So, with De
they've
Bruyne,
been dealt with very quickly. Yeah, this one hasn't. Yeah,
with De Bruyne, obviously, not starting a game at Anfield just looks crazy, right? That looks as though there's got to be something else going on there. Yeah, okay, he's had fitness issues, whatever. But you think of players like João Cancelo, who's just booted out of the club, basically, and then Edison obviously still around. De Bruyne is still around. Is it a case that they've not been as cutthroat as maybe they could have been? Yeah. With some of the players that maybe are now problems for them?
I mean, to your point on De Bruyne, as we know, both Pep and De Bruyne denied there's a problem there. But then, I have to say, I've never known many situations where 2 people at a club that have fallen out actually come out and say, we're not getting on with each other, we're still together. So, I think, we'll wait and see on that. I think what it is, I think you've got a lot of players who've been at City now throughout the Pep Guardiola period most of the time, and De Bruyne is one of them. You've got De Bruyne, Kyle Walker, you've got Bernardo Silva, you've got Gundogan, who, when they started working with Pep, it was a case of, this guy's going to win me lots of trophies. He's an absolute genius. I'm going to do whatever he says. But they've won all those trophies now. So it's almost like, well, I've flogged myself for 7, 8 years. I know exactly what I've won. I can't handle this intensity. I need to be treated differently now. I need a different approach. And I think the point about should they have moved these players on, I think they took their eye off the ball in 2 summer windows, whereby 18 months ago, would have been, they won the treble. They let Gundogan go. Great decision. Right decision. Brought him back. Terrible decision. They could have let De Bruyne go then because his injuries just started to stack up. He had a good season last year, but De Bruyne is clearly being affected by injuries. But what's happened is, when they let Gundogan go in 2023, if they'd moved a couple more on, they wouldn't be in a situation now where they've got 4 or 5 that look like come to the end of the road.
And they might have kept Cole Palmer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they might have kept Tosin. They might have kept Romeo Lavia.
Yeah.
There are kids who've gone on and done very well elsewhere that maybe they look like they got a good price for at the time. Absolutely. That actually could be the cornerstones of this new team.
So they were just kind of maintaining the squad then, but now they're plugging gaps. And it's hard to plug 4 or 5 gaps at once, isn't it? Because, I mean, you look back to the end of the Man United era under Sir Alex Ferguson, Rio Ferdinand, Nemanja Vidic, Patrice Evra, Paul Scholes, Ryan Giggs, Michael Carrick to a certain extent. All of a sudden, these guys have to be replaced. And United tried to replace them. They couldn't do it. Each time they signed an inferior player. And that is the danger that City face now because, let's say that they brought in Mateus Nunes to replace Gundogan, which hasn't worked out. So once you start signing players that aren't as good as the ones that they're replacing, it happened to Liverpool back in the 90s, it's a long way back. And I think City are at that point now where, unless they get it right in January, and that is debatable because they've got...
So what are they going to do in January? Because they've made some quite positive noises about going to splash the cash. I mean,
so they announced last week their financial results, and they basically made a profit of £139 million on transfer dealings this year. But they've got a huge war chest of profit because they haven't spent much in the last 2 years. So they've got money to spend
and sold a lot of academy graduates as well.
Yeah, so they've got a big transfer kitty, as they say. But they are wanting to bring players. And the 2 names that I've had mentioned to me, I'm sure you've heard the same: Martin Zubimendi at Real Sociedad and Bruno Guimaraes at Newcastle. Now Zubimendi didn't go to Liverpool in the summer for whatever reason. I think it's very hard to get players at Sociedad and Bilbao, as we know. But for that to happen, I'd imagine Liverpool will be back in for Zubimendi. If it's an indication that he'll lead, they'll be back in for him. So what is the most attractive option to Zubimendi, Liverpool or Man City? It's debatable. But the bigger question for me is that we still don't know the outcome yet of the 115 charges and what... City deny all the charges, we know. It could go either way. If City are hit with a massive points deduction, probably apply next season. But if they're out of the Champions League, maybe not even the Premier League or way, way down the table, these players that might sign in January will be thinking, well, I don't want to stick around for that. I want to be in the Champions League next season. What assurance is going to give me that I can move on? City can't give anybody a relegation clause or a non-Champions League clause. If they give one player that, the whole squad will want one. So if they're bringing people in January, they're going to have to get over that hurdle. And it's not as easy as people think. It's not just a case of throwing money at somebody, because people like Zubimendi and Guimaraes will have other offers.
Well, and we should just update on the case that the hearing is now finished, and the verdict is due. Well, I mean, it was originally going to be due sort of early mid-January. It now sounds like it might be later, February, maybe even March. So nobody who's signing in January can do so with any clarity around what league they're going to be playing in next year, or what constraints are going to be placed on City in the future. And
it may even run into the summer as well, because the appeal process could take forever.
That's what I was just going to say.
That's the issue they've got, that players want clarity. So it's exactly the same when the Super League happened, and the players were being threatened with not playing international football. They go and say, well, I want to know where I'm going to be playing in the next season. And if you can't give them any clarity, you are going to struggle to sign players.
I mean, I know that the Premier League's view is that they want this resolved with the appeal this season. Their aim and their intention is to try and get this whole thing wrapped up so it doesn't bleed into another year. But if City are found guilty in a particularly, if a lot of those, the majority of those charges they're found guilty on, they're going to appeal them, and that appeal, the more appeals there are, the longer it goes on, and the more it can go into the summer and next season. It's very difficult to see it being a clean, sort of finale one way or the other.
But aside from the lack of signings, no senior outfield player signed a new contract at City since Kyle Walker in September 23. So even the current squad aren't committing their long-term future to the club. So I think Pep's new contract, if he sees it through, expires in 2027. Between now and 2027, 18 Man City players have got contract renewals. Now, we're getting to the point that the 2025 guys are entering the last 6 months of the contract. The 2026 guys are approaching that really significant point.
Who's in that group, do you know?
I can't remember, but I did do a piece on it about 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I know that it's Haaland and Foden for 2027. Now, people like Haaland and Foden, you have to start doing them now. You can't get to 2026. So they've got a huge backlog of contracts backing up that need to be sorted out. Chiki Baguristan, the director of football, is leaving. Hugo Viana's coming in from Sporting Lisbon, who, the success at Sporting has been finding players like Victor Gyökeres from under the radar. They haven't been signing Man City players. So they've got this whole change that's coming at the club right now. They've got a lot of players whose contracts are up next summer and in 2026. I think, you got the backlog of John Stones, Ruben Dias, Haaland, Foden, all these players in the next 2 years have got contract situations. So they've got a lot to do in terms of bringing people in and keeping people. And it's, like I said, Kyle Walker was the last one, September 23. That's a long time for a club in Man City to not do a contract.
And Pep's future is far from certain. And I know that there's kind of a talk that's all been resolved with this 2-year contract, and that's put that issue to bed. Well, there are lots of people at City who don't expect Pep Guardiola to be at City at the end of that contract. That there was a kind of a sense that the talk and the speculation around his future, the constant questions in press conferences were just getting so frustrating that it was kind of overshadowing everything, that they wanted to kind of show people that he was committed to the cause. But there are plenty of people at City who don't believe that he will be here for those extra 2 years.
Just on that contract, so next summer, 2025, De Bruyne and Gundogan are the big two. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think either will get a new contract because age, injury profile, all that situation. 2026, Bernardo Silva, who's now 30, John Stones, who's 30, Edison, 31, who's had interest from Saudi Arabia, James McAtee, who's a promising young midfielder who at 22 hasn't been sorted out yet, Kyle Walker, and Stefan Ortega. So you've got high-profile players there entering the final 18 months of the contract. Now, I don't think they're going to do anything with any. I mean, McAtee as a young player might get sorted out, but they're not. You can't see them giving Bernardo, John Stones, Kyle Walker, or Edison a new deal in the next 12 months because of the age, the profile they're at. So they could be losing those players in 18 months. And then you're hitting your stars like Diaz and Foden and Haaland. So I think you prioritise those now ahead of those. But if you lose 5 players in 18 months' time, as well as
a massive turnover,
as well as 2 this summer in De Bruyne and Gundogan, the next 18 months, Bernardo Silva, Stones, Edison, Walker, Gundogan, and De Bruyne go. That's a massive, massive risk.
I'm conscious that we have spent this whole time marking his 500th game in charge by talking about what an absolute mess it is. I think we should just at least nod to the fact that of what they've achieved at this point, and as critical as we are of this group of players in their current form and the manager, what he's going through. I mean, this is unprecedented what they've done. 4 leagues in a row. The treble, the success that they've had. I mean, if this is the end for Guardiola, if he doesn't recover from this, whatever that looks like, does he go down as the greatest Premier League manager ever?
Not for me. I think Fergie's longevity wins it just. But in terms of anything that's come since then, so talking Mourinho, Wenger, I think he outstrips them by a mile. Just in terms of the consistent level that he's managed to achieve. I know we spoke earlier on the podcast about how the Premier League's changed. Mourinho was responsible for one of those kind of step ups, but Guardiola was responsible for the next one. Teams planning or having to plan to get around 100 points to win a Premier League title is all down to Pep. He made that step up in level.
I mean, I think you got to put Jurgen Klopp in that conversation as well. I mean, he didn't win enough, but he was up against that machine at Man City, and I think had Pep and Klopp swap clubs, would it be a different story? I think Klopp has been one of the great managers of the Premier League era, although he could be kind of eclipsed by Arne Slot in his first season, which would put it into some perspective a little bit. But you're right. I mean, you forget what cities have achieved under Pep. You mentioned the treble, 4 in a row. The Centurion season when they won when they had 100 points, the domestic treble,
which no one had ever done.
No, yeah, exactly. There's so many things that you kind of forget because they've been so successful. You forget the magnitude of their achievements. They've basically rewritten the record books.
Yeah, and I think you also forget from an aesthetic point. I mean, I know a lot of people. I guess you guys watch them more than me, so maybe some people find them boring to watch when they're in their pom. I guess because I'd see them, I don't know, 10, 12 times a season, maybe less. When you see their high line, like where their back four are, and the control that they have, and the risk that they take in their game, I just remember the first few years of City in the Premier League under Guardiola. You go to City and it's like nothing you've ever seen. The defensive lines were 20, 30, 40 yards from where most other teams were. It was ridiculous how they penned teams in, and the press was relentless, and the quality on the ball. I mean, we should, just talk about the style aspect of this as well. How he's completely sort of revolutionised the style of the Premier League, and how many other teams, Arsenal most obviously, sort of imitated.
Well, maybe it's the detriment of Russell Martin and Southampton is a point where too many managers and coaches try to copy
Stop trying to negate everything.
No, I'm being serious.
This is a positive point about the style impact.
It's also not one set style.
I have to be serious on that one
because he's done it in different ways. He's built different teams in the way that Fergie built different teams, but Pep has done it in different ways. That first team was all about wingers, pace out wide with Sane and Sterling. Then he changed, and we mentioned before he did it without a striker, with a false 9. Then he had Haaland, who's broken the Premier League goal scoring record. So it's the defined principles that every team is kind of asked to fulfill. But he's also done it in very different ways, which I think is to his credit as well, because it's not just one way or his way or the highway. He has looked to kind of adapt and evolve and do it in different ways.
You're right. I mean, they've been utterly dominant, but for me, the most exciting Man City team I've seen was the Mancini team. They won it for the first time in 2012. The 6-1 at Old Trafford. They put 5 or 6 at Tottenham that day. Aguero, Nasri, Balotelli, Tevez. That was a really exciting team, and that gets forgotten about because they didn't have the dominance of Pep's team. Pep's team have been so much in control that they have been boring at times because they just don't give teams a chance. I want to see teams that take a chance and leave gaps at the back end, but they never did that because they're utterly in control. So from a perspective of being absolutely ruthlessly professional winners, yes, they have been great. But if you ask me who would I pay for a season ticket to watch, whether it would be Mancini team or Guardiola, I'd watch the Mancini team.
Well, boring, monotonous, out of touch, out of ideas. Congratulations, Pep, on your 500th game. That's all from us this week. See you soon.